So we've been looking at this text, Mark chapter 12, verses 28 and following. We've been here, this is our 6th week in this little section. And we saw all these different aspects of true human flourishing. First, that it begins with the belief in the triune God. We took a whole week looking at that and why that's important to understanding who we are as humans and what it means for us to flourish. We took a week at loving God with all of our hearts, the control center of our lives. We said that the heart, in the way it's described in the Bible, the heart takes in all of the information from the mind, from the emotions, from the body, from the spirit, and that's where decisions are made. And that's why all through the Bible it talks about having a heart of flesh and not a heart of stone. Because you can have all the right information come in, but your heart can still choose the wrong decision. So we spent a whole week on that. We took a whole week looking at what does it mean to love God with all your soul. And we looked at soul as specifically the emotions and the will. That part of you that has feelings. And we talked about what does it mean to love God with all of your feelings, with all of your emotions. And we all, I think, agreed, or I just agreed on behalf of all of us, that that's a hard thing to let our emotions be to the glory of God. Because oftentimes we have the wrong emotions. We want to justify our emotions, but they're still wrong. And they're not honoring to God. So we spent a whole week looking at that. We spent a whole week looking at loving God with all of your mind. The life of the mind. And you remember I made the case that the mind really has your overarching intellect. It has the specific thing that you're focusing on, or your awareness. And then, of course, the in-house commentary. In a lot of ways, and a lot of people emailed me about that. They said that it was very illuminating, because for all of us, we have the things that we think about, our ability to think, and then we have specific things that we have awareness in, that we notice, that we say, hey, wow, I didn't see that before. And we talked about how we want our awareness, of course, to be seeing God at all times and all circumstances, seeing his heart in things, and then, of course, the in-house commentary. For most of us, that's the big deal, isn't it, in life of the mind, the thought life. That in a lot of ways, our minds are like a political commentary show. And there's people on both sides of every issue, and they're yelling at each other. And that's what's going on inside of our minds, is that there is God's heart that wants to share with us, and then there's our own self-defeating thoughts and things that we were socialized in, and that's the battleground of the mind. And we talked about the need to love God, to let that internal commentary be godly and not just be the shouting of two opposing sides, both to our detriment. All right, we spent a whole week on that. Then we spent a week, last week, on loving God with all your strength, and we talked about our bodies. And how our bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit, how God wants our bodies to be in subjection or submission to our spirits, that our spirits can serve God, and if God's going to have us here on the earth, might as well be as healthy as we can be, in the best shape we can be, that as long as God has us here, we can serve him. Now, this week and next week, we're moving into what is called the second commandment. If you look in these verses here, it says, this, at the end of verse 30, this is the first commandment, and the second like it is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. So this is the second commandment. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And I really want to focus today on just the loving your neighbor as yourself. So I'm going to talk about loving yourself today. Now, next week we'll look at what it means to love our neighbor, because first we have to deal with what it means to love somebody as ourselves. Does that make sense? So we'll look at loving your neighbor, and we'll close it out next week. And next week we're meeting at the Strawberry Community Center, right? We've heard that a few times. Now, as always, I'm going to teach for about 30 minutes, and then I'll take your questions. So that number's going to keep popping on up. If you want, please text in your questions. I'll do my best to answer them. And if your phone doesn't text, just ask your neighbor to borrow theirs, or you can pass a note and we'll get in trouble. And you can ask your neighbor to text it in for you. So I want to talk about loving yourself. Now, the reason I want to talk about this is, obviously, loving yourself is a pretty big deal in our culture. People talk about loving yourself all the time. I did a Google search, and I found like 5,000 hits on loving yourself. I found one. This was on someone's blog who I don't know. The name of the blog is called Abundance Tapestry: Mastering Self and Manifesting Abundance. So that sounds very Marin County. And there's 17 ways to love yourself. And this thing was shared on Facebook about 4,000 times. And it was just kind of released just recently. And it says, there's things like 17 ways to love yourself is to fall in love with yourself. To eliminate self-criticism, to be kind and positive, to acknowledge your effort, to let go of worry, to trust yourself, to forgive yourself, to be truthful to yourself, to grow spiritually, to make positive affirmations every day. It's funny, I think that went out in the 70s where people looked at themselves in the mirror and said, "You are a tiger." You know what I mean? But she still... That was like the 70s, like the power tide at the time, right? When people would look in the mirror and you remind yourself that you are an animal in the business world or whatever. But I bring this up because there's so much of this. There's so much discussion of you need to love yourself. Now, not knocking it, because some of those things are actually true. Like, we do need to forgive ourselves. I mean, so not to just like kind of make a joke and dismiss it. There's some reality to this. But the Bible teaches something differently. And what's amazing is that the Bible never says you need to love yourself. It never says that, not one time. You cannot find one verse in the Bible that says to love yourself. And there's a reason for that. And I'm going to explain it to you today. The Bible never says to love yourself. The first thing we need to do before we do anything else is remember that this love your neighbor as yourself, is it the first commandment or the second commandment? It's the second. That is super important for us. Very important. It does not begin with love yourself and love your neighbor. It begins with loving God with all that you are. See, in the Bible, we are taught very clearly, very specifically, that the vertical axis, God and a person, sets the pace for everything that goes on the horizontal. Does that make sense? What goes on between God and a person, that sets the pace for everything that goes on the horizontal level, whether it's the way you deal with yourself or the way you deal with other people. That all stems from the vertical. And it's important that Jesus makes it very clear at the end of verse 30. He says, this is the first commandment, speaking of loving the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind. And he says, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. So it begins with loving God. And the reality is that all attempts at having a healthy self-relationship with yourself and having a healthy relationship with another human being, all of it stems from loving the Lord your God with all that you are. With the wholeness of who you are, that being devoted to God, that sets the pace. My pastor, John Henry Corcoran, used to always say, Daniel, if we're fighting people, we're fighting the wrong battle. I don't know that there's been a truer word ever spoken to me than that. When you're fighting people, you're fighting the wrong battle. Because the reality for all of us is our battle with people isn't really the right battle. Because our issues with people always stem from spiritual struggles that we ourselves are having or that somebody else is having. And if you look at the gospel, and we're going to talk a lot about this today, Jesus shows us how to love people who are unlovable, who are hard to love, who don't even deserve love, but yet Jesus still gets it done. And so if he can get it done, and because we're following him, by his Spirit, we should be able to get it done as well. So it's important that we put this right from the very beginning, that the vertical informs the horizontal. Loving yourself is not the first commandment. Loving God is the first commandment. Okay? So it begins on the vertical. It has to. Now, second, as I said, Jesus never says, love yourself. Notice he doesn't say there, love your neighbor as you love yourself. He doesn't say that. He says, love your neighbor as yourself. This is important. Why? Because Jesus assumes that all people already love themselves. I'm going to say that again. Jesus assumes that all people already love themselves. See, this is the problem. The problem is not that people don't love themselves. The problem is that people love themselves in a self-destructive way, in a way that is hurtful to them and others. If you look at every interpersonal ill in society, it is always somebody doing it best by themselves. I would say to you even this, that somebody who is a drug addict is loving themselves by using drugs. Now you can make the case. You can make the case that they're in bondage to it. It's really not their fault. But when it first began, it began as something that they were doing for themselves. Something that made them feel good. And for those of you who've been around the fellowship, you know I have a history with that kind of stuff. So I can tell you, I didn't do it because I was invited. I did it because I wanted to. It was fun. It was the type of life I wanted to live. And the reality is that the problem with humanity is that we already love ourselves by nature of being human, but our love for ourselves is faulty. Our self-love, because of the fall of Adam and Eve, is faulty. And because our self-love is faulty, we have all sorts of problems. We have self-esteem problems. We have self-exaltation problems. We have interpersonal problems. But I will put to you this. Everything that you do, you actually do because you love yourself already. If you allow yourself to sit with that, as you evaluate your own life, it's kind of a profound and terrifying thing. When you realize that everything you're doing already, you do because of your own self-love. You wake up in the morning, whether you get up early to do whatever you do in the early morning, whether you're sleeping, you do that because that's what you want to do, because you love yourself. Whatever you choose to eat over the course of the day, you do that because you love yourself. However you choose to adorn yourself, the people you choose to surround yourself by, the things you do with your leisure time, the things you do during your work. You do these things because you love yourself already. And because of the fall of Adam and Eve, just as their relationship with God fell, their relationship with all of creation fell. And their relationship with themselves fell as well. And the reason we have so much popularity in discussion about loving yourself today is because everybody realizes that there is a problem with the way people see themselves. But the Bible would teach not that they need to learn to love themselves. The Bible would teach that you love yourself already. You love yourself in a destructive way. And God wants to show you a new way to view and love yourself. And that is what one aspect of salvation is all about. One aspect of salvation is you and I being able to see ourselves in the proper light. That we get to view ourselves, we get to have relationship with ourselves as individuals in a way that is healthy. Now, third. So we started, it's the second commandment, not the first. Second, Jesus never says love yourself because he assumes that we all love ourselves already. Third, the greatest self-love is still radically sacrificial. The greatest self-love is still radically self-sacrificial. And I need to say that because this is what we learned from Jesus. If you want, you can turn your Bibles, John chapter 15, verses 12 and 13. Look what it says. It says this: "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no other than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends." You see that? Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for his friends. The greatest love, the greatest self-love, is still radically self-sacrificial. See, the problem with all the teachings in pop culture today about self-love is that it's all radically selfish. It's all do this for yourself. Do this because you want it. Do this because you deserve it. Do this because you should treat yourself good. And it's never about you should do this for others. But the Bible teaches from cover to cover, from Genesis to Revelation, that the greatest love is radically self-sacrificial. It's self-giving. Jesus, look at Jesus in Matthew chapter 10, verses 38 and 39. He says, "He who does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. He who finds his life will lose it, and he who loses his life for my sake will find it." He who loses his life for my sake finds it. See, what Jesus is saying is you need and I need to give up our self-love that is not informed by loving God with all our heart, soul, strength, and mind, because that is faulty. We need to give that up. If we are willing to give that up, if we're willing to lose our self-styled life and follow Him, then we'll find our real life. Then we'll find a self-image, a self-worth, a way to relate to ourselves that is truly the life that we were meant to lead. And I think that's what's going on, is that in our day and age, and especially you start talking about this, and this is tough for us in the West because Western culture, especially American culture, is so radically self-centered, isn't it? It's so radically individualistic. Unlike any other culture, the hardest thing for us in America is to realize how strong the prescription on the goggles we wear as a culture. So strong. The way we've been raised, and I'm not knocking being raised here. I'm grateful. But the reality is that we all wear very strong prescriptions towards rugged individualism, selfishness. It's all about me. And if America is very much wearing this, there's no doubt that Marin County, the Bay Area, has got an even thicker prescription. I mean, if in America marriages can't last at a 50% rate, it's even double that in this county. And there's a reason for that. And it's because individualism and union with another person in marriage actually run against each other. You can't maintain your rugged individualist identity and try and have a successful marriage. It's just not possible. You have to compromise. And I don't know about you guys, but compromising isn't exactly so easy. And it's not easy when you realize that in compromising, you are giving up yourself. Right? Let's be honest. In a marriage, when you compromise, you're giving up yourself. And then you're inundated with this. You need to take care of yourself. You need to look out for yourself. And it's all about you. And don't you deserve to have what you want? I mean, every advertisement is pressing this love yourself button. Eat a Snickers. Love yourself. Buy these shoes. Love yourself. Buy this SUV so you can go driving on the hills in the open country, but yet nobody ever really does that with those cars. But you know what I mean? And that's how you treat yourself good and get season tickets to the Giants and feel good. And you guys get what I'm saying? See, true self-relationship, because of these cultural goggles, it only comes from God. Because God will tell you if you're struggling with your spouse, God says, listen, you need to die to yourself, you need to love your spouse as if you're loving you. Isn't that when you go before God with relational struggle, doesn't He always say, you need to die to yourself and love that person right where they are? Isn't that why we don't like going there a lot of times? We just want someone to say, well, yeah, you're right for being frustrated with them. I mean, they deserve an earful or five. You know, like they deserve that. No. God says, look, I want you to love them right where they are, just the way I love you right where you are. Flawed, messed up, not all together, but I love you. I want you to do the same thing. I want you to do the same thing. See, the greatest self-love is truly self-sacrificial. It really is. The greatest way to view yourself is to view yourself as giving up yourself for the sake of something greater. I know it's interesting, in our hearts and minds, the people who we esteem highest in the world are all people who gave up themselves for something greater. Isn't that the truth? You look at every cultural icon in American history, and almost everyone is somebody who gave up themselves for a greater cause. You look at Martin Luther King Jr., for all of his flaws. I mean, there's no doubt this guy gave up his life to try and see African Americans have the same rights under law as Caucasians. I mean, you look at someone like Gandhi who went on a hunger strike to try and get England from ruling over India. We look at it like, wow. But the reality is that those acts of self-giving, the reason we esteem that so highly is because the ultimate act, of course, was in Jesus. That's who Jesus was. And that is the road that Jesus calls us all down. He calls all of us. See, I love this about Jesus. Jesus doesn't teach something like Buddha. Buddha talked about things he never experienced. Jesus said, look, I want you to follow me, and I'm going to walk down that road before you so that you have someone to follow down that road. I'm going to take it all the way down. And Jesus, nobody takes my life from me. I give it up freely. And not that it was always easy for Jesus, and it's not always easy for us, but we know as we follow Jesus down that road, he's ahead of us, blazing the trail in front of us. Now, when you start talking about self-love and self-sacrifice, the same thing. Well, what about self-esteem? That always ends up coming out. What about self-esteem? Listen to this. Christians strike the balance between self-exaltation and self-deprecation. Think about this. The Christian faith, belief in Jesus and the finished work of Jesus, a Christian in his own self-relationship will strike the balance between self-deprecation on one hand and self-exaltation on the other hand. Now, I'm going to explain this because this is kind of powerful. We live in a culture where there's really two sides of the equation. There is the self-exaltation side, or self-idolatry. It's kind of, I've been reading a lot about the millennial generation, which is technically the generation just younger than me. They call it the YouTube generation now, where everyone just wants to put a little video up on YouTube and hope to get like 1,000 hits. And you feel like, yeah, I'm super cool because I got 1,000 hits on me singing a song with an auto-tune. I was checking this out a little bit yesterday. I almost brought it, but there's expletives. There's a young girl, she's probably like 14 or 15, and she's singing a song with an auto-tuner, and she's getting mad at it because she's not a good singer to start with, and then the auto-tune's not helping. You know, and so she's like cursing and getting all mad, and this thing's got like 1 million hits. And I think you might, you know, and so in a lot of ways, in the younger generation, it's the notice me generation. It's the exalt me generation. And there's all this discussions about the entitlement epidemic and the narcissism epidemic. There's all these books coming out about how the younger generation, it's all about affirmation. Just affirm me, affirm me, affirm me. Tell me I'm phenomenal. And it's the fruit of the baby booming parents who just are doting on their kids all the time. So now the kids, they don't know how to work for their pay. They don't know how to work for their grades. They just love them, tell them they're phenomenal, and then they just expect the world to roll over and give them money. You know what I mean? And there's a whole, it's a big problem right now, because now that the millennials are entering the workforce, they just expect that they should get hired as the CEO, and they haven't even worked for 5 minutes. That's why I was talking with one of the heads of the seminary, and I said, so Daniel, what do you see with young people? I'm like, I just see a lot of entitlement. I just see a lot of, I finished seminary, now give me the mega church. They're just waiting for me to come pastor them fresh out of seminary. Like, you know, that's wonderful and all, but that's just not realistic. It's like our parents learned how to pay their dues, and we've just never had to. And so we have to battle against that. So on one hand, you have this kind of self-exaltation that even though I've never done anything, I'm phenomenal kind of view. You know? And even though all the things that I've done don't show that I'm phenomenal, I still think that I am. So there's that side of it, and then of course there's the negative self-esteem side of it. I feel terrible about myself. Woe is me. You know? And so, and in some ways, they go hand in hand, because when you self-exalt yourself and you realize that you're not the smartest, most beautiful, most intelligent, best at everything, that is kind of disconcerting, isn't it? You know what I mean? When you've been told your whole life that you're phenomenal and that you can do anything, and then you realize that you can't hit a major league pitcher, and you can't make $1 million by trading penny stocks for $5 and all these other things. You can't do these things. You start feeling like, well, woe is me. I thought I could do all this, and I can't. The reality is that the cross of Jesus Christ keeps a Christian from either self-exhortation or self-deprecation. This is phenomenal. The cross both humbles and esteems us simultaneously. Think about this. Every time we start to get like an inflated self-view, you take, with the eyes of faith, you look at the cross of Jesus Christ and you realize that he died on the cross for you. The reason Jesus is there is not because of what he's done. He's there because of what I've done. So when we start feeling like, yes, I got it going on. Woo! Worship me. We look with faith at the cross and we realize he's there because of me. And this pride. So Jesus, at the cross, humbles all of humanity, takes all of humanity and says, listen, you need saving. And so it cuts the legs right out of self-idolatry. Boom. A Christian who has an inflated self-view, you got to wonder if they're actually walking with Jesus. Because Jesus, his whole ministry was like, look, I'm going to die for you. Because you needed this. I did nothing wrong. So Jesus cuts the legs out of self-exaltation. And then Jesus also cuts the legs out of self-deprecation or negative self-use. Because every time we start feeling, I'm so terrible, I'm not good enough, you look at the cross, and even though at the cross he died for you, he died because you are of that much value to God. Nobody pays a massive price for something they don't want. And you and I were adopted by the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and the fee for that adoption was the death of the Son on the cross. So when we start feeling, woe is me, we come to the cross, we realize that even though he died for us, he died because God esteems us and counts us as that important. And it cuts the legs right out of negative self-esteem. A Christian should have the most realistic view of himself, neither exalted nor self-deprecating. We don't come in on either end because the cross won't let us. We look at ourselves and we say, look, I'm created in the image and likeness of God. God thinks I'm special. Right? That props up the esteem problem. But he says, but I'm fatally flawed. That's why Jesus died. I got issues. And you guys don't even know the half. You know? I got issues. Jesus died on the cross to forgive me. So we come to ourselves as radically esteemed by God, but yet fatally flawed and redeemed. And that is the healthiest way to view yourself. It is neither I don't deserve anything or I deserve everything. It's neither of those. It's I'm going to do my best every day and I need grace. And that is what the world, we need to teach our kids this. We need to teach our kids this. We need to teach our kids like, look, I love you with my whole heart, but I don't love everything that you do. And when I tell you that you've done something wrong, I'm telling you not because I don't like you, because I really do like you. And you need to work hard. Me and Lynn have been talking about this because Obadiah's at that age now where he wants to buy things now. You know what I mean? Like Star Wars Legos are a big thing in my home. And they, you gotta love the toy companies. They know how to do it, man. Those Star Wars Legos are expensive, man. The little things like $100 for a Boba Fett plane. I'm like, $100. They know those little boys with Boba Fett. Obadiah's getting, tweaking out. Boba Fett, right? And so me and Lynn are talking. I'm like, listen, I'm not going to give Obadiah money to do chores. I'm not going to do that. And we were talking. She's like, well, explain to me why. I'm like, well, because he lives here. And you do chores because he lives here. He cleans his room because he lives here. That's why. I don't get money for taking the garbage out. I do it because I live here. And that's not my wife's job. That's mine. So I'm like, I'm not going to do it. But I'm like, I told Obadiah, look, I'll let you work for me, but you got to do your chores. You got to be faithful in doing your chores. Well, why do I get paid for doing my chores? Because you live here. And everybody who lives here has got work to do. All of us. Make your bed. Clean up your room. And we gave him the dog food job. I'm tired of that job. That's Obadiah's new job. I'm like, you do that faithfully, I'll give you some work to do. Like you have to do it faithfully for a week. If I know I can trust you doing what you're supposed to do, then I can hire you. But, see, I don't want to raise my son. I almost got ran over I was thinking about this. I almost got ran over the other day by like a teenager driving a Lexus SUV. And I thought to myself, I'm like, this is what's wrong with Marin County. When I grew up, my parents made me work for my own car. I had a friend who got a brand new car. I got an my car was cool. It was a 74 orange Carmagia. Super cool. Really orange, too. You know what I mean? It was like a police car magnet. That was a whole other story. But, I had a friend who got a brand new car. His parents bought him a brand new car. And I remember I got in the back seat. He had the car for like 3 weeks, and there was gum on the side of the seat. Gum. And I'm like, dude, there's gum on the side of your seat. He's like, I know. I'm like, well, why is it still there? He's like, well, I want whoever put it there to get rid of it. I'm like, dude, it's your car. He's like, well, if they don't get rid of it soon, my dad will just take it into the shop and I'll get a new back seat. There's a difference, right? There's a difference. And we need to make sure that we are not raising up our kids to be entitled. To think that the world's, because you know what the hard truth is? Especially in this economy, it's all not on a silver plate for people anymore. It's really not. You're going to have to work for the things that you want. You have to work for them. And you know what? And I should just say this because we're on the subject. If we're living here in Marin County, you're going to have to work for your Christian faith, you guys. This is like the hardest place to be a Christian in America. Straight up. You got to work for it. Because it's not like you go somewhere else and it's like it's Christian Disneyland. You know, that's just the truth. It's Christian Disneyland other places. And there's nothing wrong with that. But we don't live there. We don't live there. We live in a different kind of place with different issues. And you guys, you need to want it here. You need to want it here. It's, Christian spirituality is not on a silver platter for you, but there's all sorts of other types of aberrant, new age, non-traditional spirituality that are on a silver platter for you here. There's all other influences, not Christian influences. So we have to be willing to work for it. We have to work for it. Now, here's my question. And don't forget, you can text in your questions. Is your and my self-love cruciform shaped? Is your self-love and my self-love cruciform shaped? And that word cruciform means the shape or the form of the cross. That's what that word means. Do we view ourselves through the lens of the cross of Jesus Christ? I was thinking about what John the Baptist said in John 3:30. It said, he must increase, I must decrease. That is quintessential Christian spirituality and self-love right there. Jesus must increase, I must decrease. And that says, are we loving ourselves? Are we viewing ourselves in a cross shape? Are we saying, look, my ways are dying, Jesus' ways are coming to fruition? That has to be the question. Not only did John the Baptist say this, the Apostle Paul said something very similar. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 2. For I determined not to know anything among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. Paul's saying, look, when I came to you, people in Corinth, there was one thing that I was about, and that was the cross of Jesus Christ. Nothing else. Now, there's no doubt the Apostle Paul, he could have been about all sorts of things. He was a very smart guy, very well educated, very cultured. I mean, he was a Roman citizen, and he was a Pharisee. I mean, he was the complete package in those days in Israel. He had the best of both worlds. I mean, not anyone got to study with the premier rabbis of the day. That was for specially chosen people who could pay a lot of money to do that. When Paul calmed and said, look, great learning, so smart, I'm so well traveled, all these things. He came with one thing, Jesus Christ and him crucified. That's the question for us. Can we talk like John the Baptist? Can we talk like Paul the Apostle? Can we talk like Jim Elliot, who died in South America some 67 years ago? He said, a man is no fool to give up what he can never keep, to gain what he can never lose. Can we speak that way? And just to lead us into next week, as we look at loving our neighbors as ourselves, simply the golden rule, Matthew chapter 7, verse 12. It says, therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Do you see that? Whatever you want people to do to you, do to them. So if you and I we love God with all our heart, soul, strength, and mind, all that within us, we love God, and then we view ourselves cruciform shaped. We see ourselves not as self-exalted nor as self-deprecating. We love ourselves self-sacrificially. We realize that we already love ourselves, and oftentimes that's why we sin as much as we do. Because we're trying to love ourselves in the way we deserve. As we love ourselves properly, then it says, whatever you want men to do to you, do to them. So however you want, if you were in someone else's shoes, how would you want someone to treat you if you were in someone else's shoes? That's how you should treat people. And brothers and sisters, that is the watershed of Christian ethics. If you were that person, how would you want to be treated? If you were standing in somebody else's shoes, having had someone else's past, someone else's life, if that was you, how would you want to be treated knowing their stuff from the inside? And that changes us, doesn't it? Because most often we treat people the way we think we deserve to be treated, irrespective of who they are and what they are and how they became what they are. See, we often are not compassionate enough to look at somebody else and say, this person has had a terrible upbringing, terrible issues in life, and no one's been there for them. But you know what? Right now they're not being there for me, and I'm upset about it. But we should be able to say, look, this person scared, hurt, whatever. And you know what? If I was them, this is what I want someone to do for me. That's how we should treat people. That's Christian. And we're going to see more of this just to kind of grease the runways, so to speak, for next Sunday when we're at the Strawberry Community Center on the other side of the highway. When we're there, we're going to take that. And what we'll do next week is we're actually going to take the same passage, but we're going to look at it out of Luke's Gospel. Because in Luke's Gospel, I think it's Luke 11, there is a parable that comes right after. Where, because they ask, well, who's my neighbor? And then Jesus gives a parable. So we'll take that next week to close out this series. Let's pray, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take your questions. So